Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Sauna. Thanks for joining us for another session where we sweat out the hot topics in security. So welcome to all our listeners, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at #CyberSauna. Data breaches. They're every organization's worst fear, and from Equifax to Uber, 2017 saw plenty of them. Why are companies so ill-prepared, and what are companies missing in their approach to data breaches? Today I'm joined by Marko, Principal Risk Management Consultant at F-Secure, and Tuomo, Principal Security Consultant, to give you the lowdown on breaches and what you need to know. Marko, let's start with you. Where is the breakdown happening, and why are companies so susceptible to breaches?
So a typical situation in companies is that there's this one unit that owns the business, and they usually have a very good understanding what the business implications of data breaches would be. But they are not in control of the technology. So there are providers, maybe a different unit within the organization that implements the technology. And the technology people, on the other hand, they have limited understanding of the possible business impacts. And so they are not in a position to kind of evaluate whether they are doing enough or placing sufficient investments in security controls, for example. So the IT people or the platform people, they might think that they are doing a decent job, but it's not in the right balance with the business risks.
So the two lines of the company are not aligned in their goals.
Yeah. And one of the root causes for this is that there isn't very good frameworks and discussion and risk culture that would bring these different parts of the company together and discuss these things.
I don't know that risk culture is a word that exists in sort of the keeping the lights on in servers.
And that definitely is a problem.
What kind of cyber attacks should a company be expecting?
It's a bit difficult to answer. And for example, if we look at the ransomware attacks that happened earlier, I don't think that many people were expecting that kind of thing. So basically, in a technical sense, it's a question of good hygiene and good response capability and so on. Not to prepare for one particular kind of attack, but understand the threat landscape that you have and what kind of technologies you have and how to protect them and respond to attacks.
How does a business then go about protecting themselves against this variety of attacks?
Well, I would say that good response starts from preparation. So you would need to be prepared on a technical level and on a procedure and management level to organize your efforts based on whatever happens. So it's not like a preparation for a specific kind of event, but have tools and organization and procedures in place to start acting in a coordinated manner when something happens.
So if you're not digging trenches during peacetime, then you're sort of giving away the only advantage you ever had.
Yeah. Your stupid neighbor is fixing the roof when it's not raining.
I like that.
So from risk management perspective, what I find interesting is that when you look at the 2017 worm attacks, the Petya and WannaCry, the technical root cause for those attacks to be successful is really simple and trivial. So the companies that fell victim were just running old software in production.
Yeah.
And from risk management perspective, that's probably not a situation that anybody in those organizations actually knowingly accepted this risk. Like, we are running these old applications, old software, and we are willing to accept instead of investing into mitigation. So if nobody accepted the situation, why did this incident still were able to happen? So probably it wasn't a matter of identification. There were certainly people in their organizations who knew that they were running these risky old software in production. To me, the likely explanation is that they were just not paying enough attention to evaluating the risk. So maybe they were downplaying the risk. The risk will be limited to these and these applications or these platforms, where in reality their business suffered a major impact just because of these attacks. So this highlights, in my view, a disconnection between technical discussions and technical vulnerabilities and in what kind of domain and frameworks are used to discuss those as opposed to business risk, and there's a disconnection.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft have been talking about SMB1 for like ages, like don't use it, and people kept using it because the tech departments are overworked.
Yeah.
And have to focus on other things.
But I would also say that it's not necessarily that one of the problems might be that, based on at least my experience, that organizations and companies are thinking about their environment based on business organizations, and the boundaries that are artificially drawn around systems, for example, based on a business function or application that they are producing or something like that.
So these systems are owned by production.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then there are interfaces between different business units, and there are legacy systems that are, for example, part of 2 units or something like that. And nobody is thinking about the whole environment as a single unit from the point of view of attackers. But of course, attackers do not care about business units or separation of systems between different responsibility areas and so on. So they just use whatever's available when they are breaching the environment. So it should be good for the organizations also to think about the whole infrastructure as a big target for attackers.
Yeah, instead of being divided between different like business functions. So what would be the absolute, like hypothetical scenario, what would be the absolute worst way? Give me an example of this is not how you handle a breach.
Well, based on my experience, the worst way to handle a breach is to have a plan that is somewhat communicated and decided on the organization. And then when something happens, just not follow the plan at all. Just go like hair on fire mode, try to control the situation with ad hoc stuff and so on. Because then nothing is going based on the plan, and some people are trying to use the plan as a reference, and some people are just trying to be heroic.
Okay, yeah, so it's not just about like what you're doing and if that's optimal, it's also about how in sync you are with others and their efforts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The best way of handling a breach would be to be prepared, have a good plan and processes, technology and responsibilities in place. And that concerns technology and business side of things.
There seems to be a lot of differences in public reactions, certainly, to these data breaches. And in my view, those companies who have favorable responses from the public, what seems to be common there is they're very frank and open and rapid with their communications. Mm-hmm. While you need all these capabilities in your organization to respond to these situations, some that are technical and help you identify and isolate the issue more rapidly. When you look at the capabilities at the management and communications, for example, it's very important that you have a crisis management system in place that's able to very rapidly identify the situational view and context, what has happened, what's happening, and who do we need to communicate to. And it's very understandable that at first you're very much unaware of the full scope of what's happened and if it's still happening, but you still need to communicate to the public and those involved. And when EU GDPR is in effect, you need to communicate to the data subjects, for example. So that's one thing in common to those cases that, in my view, have been handled well.
Yeah, and you need to be honest about the situation when you go public, because now in just recent memory, we have seen companies that are being completely breached, and the first thing that they come out with is, okay, this doesn't seem to affect any of our customers. And then the next day, online newspaper releases an article saying that, hey, by the way, this concerned 400 of your customers.
And that's when you put out the PR newsletter saying we take information security very seriously, even though it's apparent that you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Marko, how would you like to see companies prepare for the eventuality of a data breach?
From a risk management point of view, it's really interesting to follow all these news about these breaches. So what I often think about is that when a company falls victim, or should I say the data subjects fall victim to the breaches, is that was this something that they had identified before, that this might happen, a scenario like this? And if so, if somebody accepted the possibility, because no organization has enough resources to fix all their security problems, so you need to prioritize. Maybe
so the first thing you want to hear is like, did you guys identify that this sort of attack was going to happen? And did somebody say, that's never going to happen?
Exactly. So when you think about it, a lot of these companies, the technical root cause was that they are running old applications or old software in their environment. So certainly there were people who knew about that. They knew that they had old systems and there was nothing to do about it when it comes to securing them from modern threats. So somebody made a decision to keep those old stuff in there. But did they identify what could happen, might be the scope of the impacts that might happen in terms of risk?
Because there was a guy saying, we should not be running this server anymore. And there was a business guy saying, well, we need it. It's too costly to replace it. Let's keep running it.
Yeah, but they're always going to be that guy who is, or that system or that service or whatever, which is legacy and should not be running, but it is there in any case. And somebody is bound to attack it and exploit it. So I would say that it's important to understand that these things do happen, and you need to be prepared, and you need to understand that no matter what you do, there's not a foolproof, guaranteed way of keeping the attackers out of your environment.
The techie guy is right in saying that, we should not be running this server. But the business guy is right in saying, well, we have to because we don't have the money to replace it. So what do you do? How do you bridge the gap between the sort of nerds in the suits in a company?
One way to get started would be to get all these stakeholders, so security people, InfoSec people, IT people, vendors, software architects, and business people around the same table and run a discussion about these attacker stories. So InfoSec people, they're good in identifying all these threat actors, groups of individuals who might have a motivation to attack the company or the
sort of who the attackers are.
Yeah. And the IT people, of course, they are in control and understand the technology that they are using and what are the potential weak spots there. And then the business people, of course, what they bring into the table that, okay, so now we're having a discussion that if this online criminal would be able to breach the system and take advantage of vulnerabilities and steal all your data, what that mean from business point of view? So what are the potential reputation impacts there or other sorts of activities that you would need to take in order to regain control and be back in business?
I would challenge Marko's point a bit about these IT guys knowing who are the attackers or threat actors. I would say that they think they know, but that's not usually the case, or typically, or in many cases. Like they say, generals are always fighting the last war.
Right.
So I would say that the IT guys or the risk management guys or security management responsibilities in the organization are many times preparing for the last big hack. So now I would guess that it's some kind of ransomware related thing there. All of the resources are going into planning for how to respond to a ransomware incident in the organization.
Yeah.
And the next time it will be something else. And the stuff that, for example, we do a lot of incident response and investigations around stuff that happens in organization. And in many cases, or in most cases, I would say it's not this new thing that is in the news. It's something like insider abuse, for example,
right?
Or some kind of extortion thing or fraud or whatever it is. But in many cases, it's not just doing the latest thing. So also these kind of things should be taken into account when you are planning your response capabilities and efforts.
So just because there's a new thing on the block that people are doing doesn't mean that they sort of forgot about the old things.
Yeah, exactly. I was working with a customer when the Heartbleed thing came out.
Yeah.
And it was a huge, in Finnish terms, a huge multinational company.
Yeah.
And Monday morning I came to work and I had 2 million emails about people, service owners, or like application owners. Are my servers vulnerable to this Heartbleed thing?
Right.
And these same guys had Oracle database applications that were last patched in year 2006 running on those same servers.
Right. So Heartbleed is not your number one concern here. You could be hacked at any time.
Yeah.
Who are these attackers? Like when companies are thinking about, like, there are people out there to get them, like, who should they worry about?
This might be a bit unorthodox, but I don't think that you should need to be thinking about who will attack you because you cannot foresee that. You would just need to start from the assumption that you are already hacked or attacked.
Assume breach.
Yeah, exactly. And then plan your capabilities starting from that.
Okay, so the attacker stories, you'd have the sort of the scenarios that this sort of thing might happen to us or might already have happened to us, but it's not specific in that sense that, like, who the attacker is.
Yeah.
Sometimes what the attacker is sort of going after and what you're trying to defend might be two different things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you might have your data in your organization and you love your data and you want to go to sleep with it each night and so on.
That's your crown jewel.
Yeah, exactly. But the attackers that are in your environment might not care about your data at all. It might be some kind of supply chain attack. They are going after your customer or your partner or something like that, and they are just in your environment to achieve that objective.
What about the blame here? Like, what happens next? There was a CEO who was thinking about the business too much and wasn't allowing enough money for tech spending. There was a CFO who was backing that play. The CISO was doing all the wrong things. Who needs to get fired?
Well, of course, it's always a game of conflicting interests. Of course, the companies are in the business of making money, and just spending money for security is not necessarily a good move if you not spend the money wisely. For example, in one recent case, Equifax, my understanding is that they just bought many boxes worth of shiny equipment just because they had the money, but nobody was spending time or resources internally to actually put them in their network where they
Right.
would actually do something. They are not doing anything in the closet in the cardboard boxes.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. And in defense of FireEye, their stuff probably would have caught that thing.
Yeah, but they are not that good.
Well, the person I would look at is who's the owner of this risk domain? Who should have identified this risk?
What's a risk domain?
Well, if you're a business owner, vice president, you
Yeah.
own this business area, you should be in control of all the risks that are associated there, whether the root cause for the risk was a hazard or an IT incident or anything like that. So who owns the risk and what kind of reasoning did he have in making the judgment that he did? So it could be that he made a sound judgment based on the information that was available then. And in many cases, the thing is that they are not doing a very good job in identifying the risks, or if they have them identified, they are not evaluating them properly and then making bad decisions because of that. So it's basically then, you could call it's low maturity risk management.
Yep.
But there's been recent cases where the CEO or the CIO or somebody got fired due to a data breach. Given that companies are in the business of making money and not all IT spending, for example, is great. You might not have a plan for that. You might be doing the wrong things. Do you think it's sort of fair then to, after the fact, come in and sort of put the blame on that one guy?
I don't think that you can generalize, but maybe he deserved it.
So there's cases where, that guy needed to be fired, and there's cases where maybe not so much.
Yeah, because of course it depends on the culture of the company or the organization.
Yeah.
Does he have the necessary resources? That's one question. And then the question that should determine whether he gets fired or not is, did he utilize the resources correctly?
Yeah, so you guys are not saying like, don't worry, breaches are going to happen anyway, but you're saying like, yes, they are going to happen, but what matters then is how prepared you were and how well you handled the situation.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tuomo. Thanks, Marko. I'll hope to have you back on the show again.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much.
That was our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and you can reach us with questions and comments on Twitter through F-Secure with the hashtag Cybersauna. Thanks for listening.